Have you ever looked at a photo you took and thought, what went wrong? It's darker than my future. You, my friend, have been a victim of poor exposure. Fear not. For understanding exposure is like learning a secret handshake with your camera. It's the key to transforming your photos from "did a potato take this?" to "wow, you're practically a professional." Exposure is all about capturing the right amount of light to create a stunning image. Too much light, and your photo will be blown out, like a bleach blonde ghost haunting your memories. Too little, and you'll be left with a dark and dreary mess that resembles your mood after a long day. Mastering exposure is about understanding the delicate dance between light and your camera's settings. It's about finding that sweet spot where your photos are neither too bright nor too dark, but rather just right, like Goldilocks finding the perfect porridge. Get ready to unlock the secret world of exposure and say goodbye to photographic nightmares. Let's break down the magical elements that control exposure, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Think of them as the three musketeers of photography, each playing a crucial role. First up, we have aperture, the control freak. It's like the pupil of your camera's eye controlling light. Next, we have shutter speed, the speed demon. It determines how long the shutter stays open. Last but not least, there's ISO, the sensitive soul. It controls the camera sensor's sensitivity to light. Now that you've met the three musketeers of exposure, it's time to learn how to make them work together in perfect harmony. Imagine them as ingredients in a recipe, too much of one, and your dish will be ruined faster than you can say burnt cookies. The key is to find the right balance between aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to achieve the desired exposure. If you want a shallow depth of field with a blurry background that makes your subject pop, you'll need a wide aperture. But be warned, this will let in more light, so you'll need to compensate by using a faster shutter speed or lower ISO to avoid overexposing your photo. Similarly, if you're shooting in low light and want to avoid blurry images, you'll need to use a slower shutter speed. However, this means you'll need to widen your aperture or increase your ISO to compensate for the reduced light entering the camera. Remember, it's all about finding the sweet spot, that magical combination where your photo is neither too bright nor too dark, but rather a masterpiece of balanced exposure. Section 4. Exposure mishaps, common errors, and how to dodge them. Even seasoned photographers fall prey to exposure blunders. One common mistake is forgetting to adjust your ISO when moving between different lighting conditions. Don't forget to lower your ISO, or your photos will resemble a washed-out mess. Another common error is not understanding how your camera's metering system works. If you're shooting a subject that's predominantly dark or light, your camera may be fooled. Use exposure compensation to override your camera's settings. And let's not forget about blurry photos from slow shutter speeds. In low light, use a tripod or stable surface. Your photos will thank you. Section 5. Mastering light tips for different shooting conditions. Lighting conditions can change faster than a chameleon on a rainbow, making it tricky to nail the perfect exposure. But fret not, dear photographer, for with a few tricks up your sleeve, you can conquer any lighting scenario. Shooting in bright sunlight? Be cautious of harsh shadows and blown-out highlights. Use a lens hood to prevent lens flare, and consider using a diffuser to soften the light. If you're photographing people, try to find some shade to avoid squinty eyes and awkward facial expressions. Dealing with low light? Don't be afraid to crank up your ISO or widen your aperture. Just remember that increasing your ISO can introduce noise, those pesky little grains, into your images, so use it sparingly. Consider using a tripod to avoid blurry photos, especially if you're using a slow shutter speed. Shooting at night can be particularly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. Embrace the darkness and experiment with long exposures to capture light trails and create stunning nighttime cityscapes. Just remember to pack a headlamp, unless you enjoy stumbling around in the dark like a confused moth. Section 6. Conclusion. Embrace the exposure adventure. Congratulations, you've reached the end of this crash course on exposure. You're now armed with the knowledge to capture stunning photos that will make your friends jealous and your Instagram followers double tap with envy. Remember, mastering exposure is a journey, not a destination. Don't be afraid to experiment with different settings, break the rules occasionally, and embrace the occasional happy accident. After all, photography is all about capturing light and creating art, so have fun with it. Now go forth and make some photographic magic, my friend. And remember, if all else fails, there's always Photoshop. But don't tell anyone I said that.